This is this is supposed to be, the Democratic Party. Right now, the DNC is making it almost impossible for anybody to run against the president. They are systematically disenfranchising the voters of all the states or many of the states that voted against President Biden during the last time around.
Over the past few years, all we've heard from certain Democratic lawmakers and the DNC is the importance of democracy and making every single vote count. They've called voter ID laws racist and basically want to make it as easy as possible for every single American to vote. That way we can ensure that we get these free and fair elections. Of course, these free and fair elections don't necessarily apply when their guy in Joe Biden might just end up losing to two other candidates that he's running up against in Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This is because these two candidates are considered non-established candidates, so, any chance that Joe Biden might just end up losing, the DNC, of course, has to change the rules to ensure that Joe Biden ends up being the winner in the end. So basically what the DNC is doing now is they're looking at the 2020 Democratic primaries in any state who voted against Joe Biden. That state is being penalized. So in this year, for instance, New Hampshire is usually the first state to have their primary for the Democratic elections, but since New Hampshire did not vote for Joe Biden in 2020, they're being penalized, and instead we're going to have South Carolina lead off the primary elections for the Democratic Party. And according to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if he or Marianne Williamson even steps foot in the states of New Hampshire or Iowa, any votes cast for them in those two states will not be counted. They won't be receiving any delegates. And not only that, but even more ridiculous, if they do step foot in the states of Iowa or New Hampshire, not only will their votes not count in those two states, but their votes will also not count in the state of Georgia. How is that not rigging an election here?
Well, I think, it's pretty clear that the DNC does not want a primary. I don't want to say that they want a coronation, but that's, I think that's a fair way to put it, actually. They're doing, they're essentially, they're fixing the process so that it makes it almost impossible to have democracy function. They're effectively disenfranchising the Democratic voters from having any choice in who becomes president or who becomes the Democratic nominee. So two of the things they've done to date is they've moved the Iowa primary. They've made rules that if anybody campaigns in Iowa or any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes that are cast for that candidate will be tallied. In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire or Iowa would go instead to the president. And now they're trying to change it so that if I campaign in New Hampshire, that none of the votes cast for me in Georgia will count. And that's significant because it's hard to win the nomination without Georgia.
Now on September 14th, they're going to be finalizing all these different rules. They're going to be voting on them. So let's hope it doesn't actually end up happening. But according to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they're even considering even crazier things. Like, for instance, they want to make RFK Jr. pay for these primaries because they're saying they should not have a primary at all, that Joe Biden needs to be the Democratic candidate, that no other person should even go up against Joe Biden. How crazy would that be, making RFK Jr. pay for these primary elections?
These rules will not be finalized until September 14th, and we've written the DNC protesting. I mean, there's some really wild things that they're now considering, including forcing me to actually pay for the primaries. And their logic is that they don't need a primary because they already have a candidate, and therefore I'm costing them all this money, and that money should be paid for by me and, maybe Marianne Williamson. So it's not, it's a process that is rigged. And we live at a time in American history when a lot of Americans think that democracy is broken, that the system, the political system is rigged, and that there's not really any democracy. And unfortunately, the DNC is taking a lot of steps that confirm that outlook.
And in a day and age where a lot of Americans have a distrust in the American election system, doing stuff like this is certainly not going to make them trust these elections anymore. And just another thing that the DNC is doing, for instance, is they're refusing to hold any type of debates. So we're not going to have Joe Biden even up on stage debating against Williamson or RFK Jr., which is completely unfair, because if you're a Democratic voter or you're a Republican voter, you deserve to see those three candidates up on a stage, or even more people up on the stage going up against Joe Biden. I don't care that Joe Biden is the current sitting US president. If you're going to tell the average American voter that Joe Biden is the best possible person for the job, whether you're a Democrat voter or whether you're a Republican voter, most people are going to disagree with that notion. And at the end of the day, if Joe Biden is somehow the best candidate for the job, why not let him debate and prove to the American people that he is the best person for the job? So here is RFK Jr. saying just that Biden needs to get up on the stage, debate him and Marianne Williamson, and prove that he is the best possible candidate to become the president in 2024.
I know you've seen the polling, as have I. 1968 contest, when your father was in the race, LBJ got to 36% as his favorability rating, and he dropped out of the race. CNN polling right now, Joe Biden at 35% favorability. Is it time for Joe Biden to drop out? Is that the message from the voters?
Well, I think that it's time for him to campaign, to actually to leave the White House, come out and have unscripted events with American voters. I don't think it's a good thing for our democracy or the Democratic Party if the only people the president is talking to are his big donors. He needs to come out and see what I'm seeing, which is a very, very high level of discontent among the American people living at a level of desperation. The average salary in this country is now $5,000 less than the average cost of living. People are paying for that deficit on their credit cards and getting charged 22% interest. It is not sustainable. President Biden is campaigning on this idea that he's brought prosperity to this country. But a lot of voters feel that they're being gaslighted because they are not seeing the prosperity in their lives. And I think he needs to come out and hear the stories.
Yeah, CNN polling showed that way more than half of America thinks that his economic policies are hurting America, not helping. Unquestionably, the pain that you talk about that Americans are feeling is real. But then I say, who's ahead in the national polls? And if you look at your numbers versus Joe Biden's over the past couple of months, look, it is impressive where you are at and what you've been able to achieve at about 13%. But sometimes you are as high as 20, but you've yet to really eat in to Joe Biden's numbers. He's still well above 50%. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, those numbers are just Democratic voters. So they're voters who voted for Biden the last time around. But, what we're seeing in our numbers where we do likely Democratic voters, we're seeing numbers that are much higher than that get up to almost the 40% for me in the early primary states.
Of course, a lot of Americans question whether or not Biden will even be able to make it another 4 years, because in 2028, if he does get reelected in 2024, 2028 will be the end of his next term. And in 2028, Biden will be 86 years old, and right now he's barely getting by. So if Biden does have to step down if he does get reelected, that of course means that Kamala Harris will be the president. And in 2020, whenever she was running, she was hardly getting any votes at all. So clearly the American people do not like her, and they would not like to see her as a president. So, a vote for Biden could essentially pretty much be a vote for Kamala Harris. That's exactly what RFK Jr. is saying right here.
You're in New Hampshire. I know you're running hard in South Carolina, too. Down there in South Carolina, Nikki Haley says a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. Is that what you believe?
Well, I think the presidency is a rigorous job. We are entering one of the most dangerous periods in our history. We are now at the brink of a war with a superpower that has more than 1,000 nuclear weapons, more than we do, and a better nuclear weapons arsenal than we have. And I think we need somebody who is in office that all Americans agree is up to the rigors of the job, that has the vigor to lead our country during a very difficult time. I think the questions that have been raised in recent press conferences about the president's cognitive capacity, that he should answer them, and the way to answer them is to come out on the stump, to have unscripted encounters with voters, to do town halls, and more than anything, to do a debate with his opponents.
Do you think other Democrats should? Do you think other Democrats should jump in?
I think the more people that are in, the better it is for our democracy. This is supposed to be, the Democratic Party. Right now, the DNC is making it almost impossible for anybody to run against the president. They are systematically disenfranchising the voters of all the states or many of the states that voted against President Biden during the last time around. So in New Hampshire, anybody who campaigns in New Hampshire, as I have, the people who vote for them, their vote will not count under the new DNC rules. The DNC this week is voting on a rule to make it so that if any candidate who steps into the state of New Hampshire, that any vote cast for them in Georgia will not count. Georgia's 164 delegates.
Right.
So, and the Democratic Party has been fighting for voting rights in Georgia, for the citizens of Georgia, since I was a little boy, since the 1960s. And now, the DNC is about to disenfranchise every voter in the state of Georgia. It doesn't seem a good way to model democracy.
So we, the people, definitely need to make sure that we hold them accountable for these elections. We need to make sure that they're fair, that they're not trying to rig this in some way to make sure that Joe Biden wins. We need to make sure that RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are given a fair shot to take down Joe Biden. We definitely need to hold them accountable here. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video.